OK, j'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 115 of the committee, the Language Committee of the House of Commons. To avoid any accidents, we ask for all in-person participants to read all of the guidelines on the cards on your table. They have been updated. This will help us prevent any acoustic incidents. To the participants, please wait for me to acknowledge you by name before speaking. All comments must be made through the chair. I would ask all of the members to raise their hand if they want to speak, whether they're in person or on Zoom. The clerk and myself will do what we can in order to respect the order of hands raised and to acknowledge you. And before moving on to the topic of the day, I'd like to remind something to the committee. You've received a press conference or a reminder of a press conference. This Thursday at 10, we will be presenting the report on economic development for communities that are in a minority situation, for OLMCs. You've all received the presser. And we are honored to receive Mr. Pierre Fouché, who is a professor of the Constitution, who is retired. And we have the Ontario French Catholic School Trustees Association. We have the chair, Robert Demers, and executive director, Yves Lévesque. So welcome to all of the witnesses. I'd like to let everybody know that I will be very strict on time. That means that we will have more time for more questions for more of us. So that said, Mr. Lévesque, I believe it is your first time at the committee, Mr. Demers as well. So you are at the best committee on the Hill. So you have 5 minutes for, as witness to give us your opening remarks, after which there will be an interactive session of questions and answers. We will start. Yes, Mr. Généreux? I have a question before going any further. With regards to the presser, or the press release, will we be able to review it after the witnesses have given their presentations? Well, we could do it at the end for the last 5-10 minutes or something like that of the second hour. Let me remind me if I forget. So we will start with Mr. Fouché. You have 5 minutes, firm 5 minutes. Go ahead. You are muted, Mr. Fouché. You are still muted. There we go. The problem has been solved. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope I did not eat into my the time I've got for my opening remarks. So I'd like to congratulate you all, especially Mr. René Arsenault for your involvement in politics. Mr. Arsenault is a former student of mine, so congratulations. So, honorable members, thank you for the invitation. I haven't had much time to prepare, so my remarks will be quite brief. I'm here as a juror and a professor of law. I'd like to stress that I can't give you any legal advice, as I'm no longer a member of the bar, but only information on points of law. First, I'd like to start with an obvious fact that you're likely aware of. The government's role is more limited because education is a provincial jurisdiction. The government of Canada cannot regulate specific educational issues such as curriculum content, examination requirements, teacher discipline, and many other matters directly related to education. In consulting the scope of your mandate for this exercise, I also noticed that the notion of continuum in education, useful for educators and stakeholders in the sector, covers more than primary and high school education, including early childhood education, universities, continuing education, And as I'll mention later, some of these areas are protected by the rights in Section 23 of the Canadian Charter, while others are a bit more uncertain. The Canadian government, however, is not devoid of means of intervention. So its constitutional validity is indisputable, and so it can offer sometimes substantial assistance to convince the provinces and territories to offer the full measure of educational rights for minorities guaranteed by the Constitution. This spending power is now governed by the new part, Article 7 of Canada's Official Languages Act. I will briefly comment on each of the elements of the study. The first part concerns early childhood. Until now, this sector, however important it may be for the development of primary and secondary education, since it fits in well with the notion of the educational continuum, is not part of Section 23, according to the jurisprudence of the Court of Appeal of the Northwest Territories. The Supreme Court of Canada has never ruled on the question, and constitutionalists in the French-speaking world outside Quebec continue to put forward arguments in favor of extending Section 23 to early childhood. As for after-school daycare, it's the same thing. The community aspect of federal programs would help build new schools in order to finance these projects. I find the arguments for including these childcare services in Section 23 convincing, since the notion of education must be interpreted broadly and liberally. The second part of your mandate concerns the financing of, or the funding rather, of primary and secondary schools. Here we are squarely within the scope of Section 23, which brings into play recent notions developed by jurisprudence, the presumption of sufficient numbers and the real equivalence of the quality of the educational experience. The criterion includes several elements on which federal intervention may prove beneficial. The third aspect concerns post-secondary education. While there are sound arguments for including preschool within the scope of Section 23, even if they have not yet found favor in jurisprudence, the same cannot be said for post-secondary education. Unfortunately, one might say if we are defending official linguistic, we might say that if we are defending official linguistic minorities. Access to post-secondary education is essential to the vitality of linguistic communities. As such, I believe that the Official Languages Act provides a sufficient framework to develop an OLEP specifically for post-secondary institutions. And let me say a word here about the inconsistency of the Canadian government, which, on the one hand, wants to encourage post-secondary institutions, and on the other hand, is reducing the number of international students in these institutions through its temporary immigration policies. You have just 30 seconds left. I find this quite suspicious. I will pass to my last point, to the impact of the continuum on the education. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've actually gone over the 5 minutes, but you'll have time during the question and answer period to expand. So, Mr. Lévesque or Mr. Lévesque, go ahead for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to everyone, to the members of the committee. I am Robert Demers, President of the OFCSTA and Vice President of CSC Providence in southwestern Ontario. With me is Mr. Yves Lévesque, Executive Director of the Ontario French Catholic School Trustees Association. Our provincial organization's offices are based in downtown Toronto. Our association would like to thank the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages for the opportunity to present its views, concerns, and some of its ideas. Through this report presentation and this brief to the committee members. Since its official creation in 1998, the association has acted as the voice of French language Catholic school boards in Ontario. Serving its members, it defends their interests and promotes French language Catholic education for the Ontario community, Francophone community. As a representative of Ontario's 8 French language Catholic school boards and the consortium, the Centre Jules Léger, which provides services to deaf and visually impaired students across the association's bodies, municipally, provincially, and federal levels. As the Crown's representative and employer, with the considerable support of its French language Catholic member school boards, the association negotiates working conditions that ensure quality Catholic French language education for its students and positive staff relations with the various unions. Through concerted action, networking, and partnerships, the association members seek to improve the quality of their products and services, particularly to ensure that the distinct character of French language Catholic education permeates every aspect of the curriculum and educational process. We seek equity for French language Catholic schools based on real needs that are unique to us. Last but not least, we are also committed to respecting the rights of our members, which are conferred by the Constitution Act of 1867 and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. French language Catholic education is one of the 4 school systems in Ontario and is supported in a number of ways by the vast majority of French-speaking Catholic parents. French language Catholic schools, chosen by nearly 70% of French-speaking parents in Ontario, now serve more than 76,801 elementary and secondary school students. Our French language school age daycares are about 181 in operation for children of 18 months to 4 years, and they are the key to the success of our schools and the development of our communities. As I mentioned, there's about 77,000 students, 300 schools, 11,000 employees. So it is the choice. These schools are the choice of 7 parents out of 10. Faced with the pressing issues that the French language education in Ontario, including underfunding, teacher shortages, and unequal access, it is imperative that governments take action. By implementing or supporting the recommendations presented in this brief, the federal government can help ensure that Franco-Ontarian students have access to a quality, equitable, and accessible education. In conclusion, the association presented an overview of the challenges facing French language Catholic education in Ontario. To meet these challenges, we recommended, first, increased funding from the federal government, specifically for school transportation, for early childhood education, and teacher recruitment and retention. Second, streamlined approval processes for school construction and infrastructure projects. Third, increased support for French language universities to increase training and the number of qualified French language teachers. And fourth, a renewed commitment to equity, ensuring that all Franco-Ontarian students have equal access to a quality education. By implementing these recommendations, the various levels of government can demonstrate their commitment to the Franco-Ontarian community and to the principles of equity and quality in education. Thank you, Mr. Demers. Once again, you can continue to provide your comments through the questions. So the next part of this panel will go as follows. Each political party has the opportunity to ask a question, and I will be very strict. You have 6 minutes to start. Don't ask a question at the 6th minute because I will cut you off. We will start this first 6-minute round with Ms. Gladu. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. The first question is for Robert and Yves. In my writing, I have 4 Catholic schools, and I'm very proud of that. Is there a difference between Catholic schools and public schools receiving funding from the federal government? No, the funding is similar. As Mr. Fouché mentioned, Catholic education in Ontario is funded publicly. The 4 systems are funded by the provincial government. Access to federal funds goes through agreements with the government. So there's a Canada-Ontario agreement, for example. Funds are redirected to the province to support certain programs. Access is the same for Catholic schools or public schools, but the numbers, of course, are different. But each system has the same access, if you will. 70% of the students are in Catholic schools and 30% are in public schools. And so it's important to keep that ratio in mind.
Les professeurs français.
How many French teachers are needed? Because French teachers are being requested. Because of the shortage now, we've been experiencing the shortage now for 10 years. We're getting close to 10 years. We need about 5,000 teachers, Francophone teachers, in Francophone schools to get to a balance that will enable us function the way we need to have a callback list, have substitute teachers, teachers that are qualified at all levels. We proposed that training be provided for about 1,000 teachers per year over 5 years to catch up with the shortage. Right now, about 400 to 400 teachers graduate every year, and many more are retiring every year. So the shortage is getting worse, and it's affecting the quality of education in the schools. Question. My second question for Mr. Fouché. Do you want to conclude the comment you started, and then I ask a question about the charter? Answer. Thank you. I had one last point concerning the numbers that is part of your mandate. The census has started. The federal government now has data on rights holders, and this has enabled us to observe that there's a gap between the proportion of rights holders in French schools and those who are not in French language schools. I also had another point. You remember that the most recent decision by the Supreme Court in June, the provinces and territories considered Section 23 when they were ruling on the admission of those who don't have constitutional rights, people from immigration sources but who want to go to French schools. So the ministers of education must consider the objectives of Section 23 when they are taking their decisions when it comes to the admission of non-rights holders. Question. You said we need a mechanism when someone doesn't have the rights. Could you describe what you meant? Answer. Essentially, looking at what the Supreme Court said, ministers could give the school boards the responsibility to decide whether or not people seeking admission into French schools can't be admitted. It's the case in Ontario. There are admissions committees that decide on admission applications by non-right holders. So others have adopted policies where criteria under Section 23 are described so that they can be expanded. If someone is not a Canadian citizen, for example, but speaks French, they could be admitted. So there are policies like this. Now, the federal government must consider funding taking into account everyone, rights holders and non-right holders who are admitted when they receive permission.
The rights they have in the Charter. Is that your view?
C'est-à-dire qu'une fois qu'ils sont admis,
Once they're admitted into the French schools, they become rights holders because of a clause in Section 23. So the answer to your question is yes.
Merci, Monsieur Fouché. Merci, Madame Gladu.
Thank you, Mr. Fouché. Thank you, Madame Gladu. The next question goes to the Liberals through Mr. Joel Lightbound. Mr. Lightbound, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to all our witnesses. Thank you, Professor Fouché, for joining us. My question are for you, and I will write to echo what Madame Gladu said. As a good former student in law, I was taking down notes when you were speaking, except for the last point that you talked about, the impact of the continuum on education. Could you please continue with that comment? Answer. I think the impact is important and could leaders give arguments on how Section 23 could be expanded, but because this has to do with us attaining our objectives in primary and secondary schools. In preschool, we could argue that it is necessary to have efficient intervention in preschools to generate rights holders and give them access to education, and to make sure that pupils coming to French schools who came through preschool, French preschool, and therefore received support and some kind of training. I'm not a pedagogist, but I imagine that there are special programs for that purpose. So this is part of equivalent quality. Now, for post-secondary education, this is tied to the development of communities. And after listening to the comments made by the representatives of the Catholic Trustees Association, I thought of the fact that there is reason to claim that education faculty should be recognized under Section 23 because they are essential to train the teachers that we need if we want equivalent quality of education. So this is information that is circulating in Francophone environments outside Quebec but has never been tested before the courts. We heard about admission of teachers in New Brunswick that are falling. I think, is this an existential threat for the long-term existence of teachers? That is what I understand. Now, do you see the jurisprudence evolving towards including post-secondary education and preschool education? Preschool, probably, but for post-secondary education, it's difficult to say. We cannot claim that all post-secondary programs or all post-secondary institutions would fall under Section 23. If we look back at how Section 23 has evolved, the intention, that was not necessarily the intention of the drafters, but we could look at faculties of education and some faculties whose services are necessary to ensure the quality of education. But now, to claim that the court will accept that all post-secondary educations be included under Section 23, I don't think we are there yet. Question. I think you told Madame Gladu, when you talked about right holders, you referred to the recent Supreme Court decision in the Northwest Territories where the notion of rights holders has been expanded. Are you satisfied with the expansion as provided for by the Supreme Court? What impact could this have in the long term? Answer. The long-term impact should be positive. I hope that all education ministers have taken good notes, because we do know that it required lots of other judgments after the 1990 ruling for the Ministry of Education to understand that when the numbers are sufficient, they need to set up a school board. Now, it may take time for this to be reflected throughout the system, but this has a positive impact. But of course, there are also terrible situations that we are all aware of. We can understand that someone from Congo who comes to the Northwest Territories to work and whose second language is French cannot attend French school. That is nonsense. Question. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? 1 minute. 1.5 minutes. You talked about the Official Languages Act harmonization during your opening remarks. In your opinion, does it appropriately ensure that the funds transferred to the provinces and territories are directed to the school boards? This will depend on the regulations. I think that the Official Languages Commissioner has already talked about this. The committee here could also talk about that. The government is preparing regulations that will guide the functioning of this accountability mechanism. Right now, I'm not convinced that the accountability mechanism is sufficiently efficient. Let's hope that the regulations will resolve the problem. That is why we need to review those regulations, which we don't have now. Question, is there something you'd like to see in those regulations which will reassure you that the funds will be well directed? Answer. First of all, it should be identified. It should not remain in the consolidated funds of provinces. It should be well identified and well targeted. There should be consequences if the rules are not respected. For example, going from funding of school boards without going to the Ministry of Education. Jurists have dealt with that. In Quebec, this is a possibility that exists. In my opinion, there is no barrier preventing the federal government from sending funds directly to the school boards. Thank you, Mr. Boucher. Thank you, Mr. Lightbound. Next question goes to the Bloc Québécois. Mr. Boileau, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our guest for coming to participate. My first question goes to Mr. Fouché. You said the federal government could transfer payments directly to the school boards, the official language minority school boards, given certain conditions, in all provinces except in Quebec. I would like you to explain how you agree with that, how you have arrived at that conclusion. Answer. Quebec has a rule that requires any organization that receives more than 50% of its funding to obtain authorization from the Council of Ministers. That's the Quebec Executive Board. Thank you. Question. Now for the Franco-Ontarian Trustee Board. You talked about equity. Do you think that the situation of Francophones in Ontario is equitable when compared to Anglophone schools? Do you have anything to say? Answer. The answer is no. There is great difficulty accessing services. You have to understand that Francophone schools in Ontario, be they Catholic or public, are considered somewhat regional schools. Students have to travel for 30 to 40 minutes every day by bus. There are no neighborhood schools, as is the case in Anglophone schools and for Anglophone communities. So when you are talking about equality in education, the answer is no. Francophone boards could be helped to quickly offer service points for these pupils everywhere. So this is a difficulty we have encountered with the government able to obtain sufficient funds to build infrastructure to meet the needs of Francophone students. And this is a challenge that continues to increase. There is unequal access to services. Question, are you saying that at this point things are going in the right direction, or it's status quo when it comes to unequal access? Answer, for now we can't say that the situation is improving. I think that over the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen that the construction of schools has not stagnated, but has slowed down So when many schools are not being constructed, there are less services for students. The Francophone population in Ontario continues to grow, not at the same pace like is the case for the Anglophone general population, but it continues to grow. And schools are not keeping pace with that growth. Children have the choice to go to the Anglophone school in their neighborhood or to cover unbelievable distances by bus to go to their Francophone schools. Sometimes parents decide to put their children in the neighborhood school because it makes things easier for them. And this continues to increase the inequalities when it comes to services. So the situation is not improving. It's always more difficult to build schools. Question, looking at the past, Rule 7 and so on, and you remember, we know that French education was prohibited for a while in Ontario. Do you think that Francophones should have some kind of compensation to address the damage that was done to them? Do you think that apologies, for example, were presented regarding Rule 7? We don't hear a lot about that. Should there be a remedy? Because you talked about underfunding, for example. Well, we need immediate measures, but I don't think you are going in that direction. To answer your question, to get to that, first of all, the damage must be recognized. There should be some kind of a case, a court case, and for the government to recognize what was done, and so that the damage can be repaired or remedied. The problem we have now is that there's no recognition of the specificity of Anglophones and Francophones in Ontario. Sometimes we're treated the same as the other school boards. The approach is that everyone is the same, and that is not the truth. Francophone education has different needs compared to Anglophone education. Sometimes it's more expensive. So it's more about recognizing the needs of the Francophone communities by the governments. And that is what will make a difference. It's probably the same for the other provinces as well. But that's a challenge. Would that compensation be a good idea? Maybe. Question now, to recognize the damage, you said that we need a judicial process, maybe through a judicial review, so that the government of Ontario should recognize the damage that was done. Answer, maybe Professor Fouché would have a better answer, but I think that could be an important case that should be filed before the courts to say, well, we are challenging French language education in Ontario against the government. That will be a big case. Thank you very much, Mr. Boileau. Thank you, Mr. Levesque. The next question goes to Ms. Ashton from the north of Manitoba. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, and welcome to our witnesses. I would like to ask you about the impact of the labor shortage for teachers and also for those working in early childhood education. What is the impact of that labor shortage on your schools? And do you think that the federal government has a key role to play in finding solutions to deal with this labor shortage? And my question goes to Mr. Levesque. Excellent question. Clearly, the lack of teachers, the lack of staff has an impact on the schools when you are forced to use unqualified teachers in schools to substitute for teachers who are not qualified. So this creates a problem of continuity. We do not necessarily have professional teachers who are in place who have the right skills. So that's a challenge. Now, those doing the job, do they have the capacity to do it? Yes, generally speaking. These are teachers who don't yet have their certificates but have the skills. So this is a band-aid solution that we are using because there's no staff. Now, that's a challenge, but there are other challenges with early childhood education when it comes to the training of people for kids. There's a shortage there, and also university training to have qualified and certified teachers in sufficient numbers. Could the federal government do something to increase the training? Yes, I believe so. Is the training of teachers, can it be improved upon in the universities? Yes, I believe so. This could...
Right now, I think even if we wanted to, there are just no... We don't have more teachers leaving universities or graduating. Just because 400 people have graduated doesn't mean that they're going to teach. It doesn't mean that they're actually going to be hired by a school. It doesn't mean that they will be called to work from one day to the next. So 80% of those people might end up teaching, but 20% of them might go into other sectors. We must increase the capacities, or rather the amount of students in universities. Is it a solution that might be temporary? Yes. It doesn't have to be a permanent solution, but it is a solution that must be considered for early childhood and for secondary and high school education. Thank you, Mr. Levesque. Same question, Mr. Fouché. There is a labor shortage. What is the impact? In your opinion, does the federal government have a role to play to remedy this issue, and what are some of the solutions you would propose? Thank you for the question. First, I'd like to repeat what Mr. Demers was saying with regards to the school buses. In Nova Scotia, it said that there are 10 more schools that are needed in Halifax. So this is an issue not just in Ontario, but everywhere in Canada. To answer your question, the teacher shortage is a very serious issue. What can the federal government do? Mr. Levesque mentioned it earlier. We need more students in educational institutions. The federal government has intervened before. There was no common law before the 1980s, and the federal government got involved and managed to set up programs that are still working in Ottawa, Moncton, but also elsewhere in the western provinces in Canada. So it has been done before, and it can be done again for education. One of the next battles for Section 23 is the shortage of teachers. Back to the initial recommendation that I made, which is to develop an official program, an official languages program for post-secondary education, or for secondary education, based on the OLEP program. This would be useful because OLEP worked well for high schools. Thank you. I do have a bit of help today because we're sick and at home. And of course, we all support all measures that would be helpful in remedying the labor shortage. Of course, it is an issue that impacts all of us, but today is not because of the shortage. It's actually a question of illness. So thank you very much for your feedback. Mr. Fouché, I find it very interesting that you've mentioned that initiative many years ago. Maybe we can indeed do something similar in education. We do need to do something because we do have a labor shortage that is quite serious and is getting worse. There is increased demand for education in French. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Two series of questions of 5 minutes and then 2.5 minutes. So 5 minutes, Mr. Généreux. Thank you. Mr. Demers, you said early on, you talked about the French Catholic schools. You said 7 students out of 10 you represent 7 students out of 10. What about the other students? Are they going to public schools? Yes. So we've had a few questions here and remarks. We are trying to see how we can improve the continuum of education in early childhood. You talked about daycare. Mr. Fouché, of course, talked about university. So that schooling, and if we look to what can be done in the next 15 to 20 years, the government has some questions to ask itself. What can we do now in order to prevent any drop in quality, for example? We know that there are there's a lot of immigration, there's a lot of Francophone immigration, and some of those objectives have been met. There are some of those Francophone immigrants, would they be able to take on some of this work? I'm trying to see this as a chain. I see that the chain might break, or that there might be some weaker links at some point in that continuum, and I'm trying to find some solutions. Mr. Lévesque and then Mr. Fouché, please. As Mr. Fouché said earlier with regards to the schools, if you we should be building 150 schools. That is a huge gap. We know that not everybody who studies law is going to come to our schools, but the chain is broken in many places, as you explained. And as Mr. Fouché explained, Section 23 doesn't cover necessarily every single level of protection. This creates problems in early childhood, at the high school level, after high school. There's no proper protection. Right now, there is no teacher training in French that is protected. The University of Ottawa is a bilingual university, and it offers training in both English and French, but there's no protection for the French teaching. So if there are more requests into English one year, then it eats into the French seats. So we do have some questions about this. Should we improve the? Should we make sure that we can bring in teachers from elsewhere? We must see if we can facilitate welcoming these teachers into the system. We have 3 universities in Ontario that have certification. Any teacher that graduates from these 3 universities should automatically be able to teach, but that is not the case. There are many reasons why that chain is often weak. It is not broken, but it is weak. Can you provide the committee with an exhaustive list of the points along this chain where the weak links are in this chain? It would be important to receive that information in a more precise way, because we're asking some questions here and we've got, just a few minutes, but it's we're not able to get all of the information we need. Mr. Fouché, in 20 seconds. Okay. First of all, early childhood education and daycare are usually in the same place as a school, as a primary school. sometimes inside. So that is a positive thing that we should consider. Second, we need education programs, and therefore we need universities, and therefore we need francophone universities everywhere in Quebec that are properly funded. And that is something that the federal government can act on. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. On to Mr. Sampson for 5 minutes. Thank you very much to everyone for being here today. It's a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Demers and Mr. Lévesque, and welcome to my colleague, Mr. Fouché, who used to be my professor. Mr. Fouché, I'll ask you a question quickly. You talked about two very important points. You talked about the continuum. That is essential for me, a point that is essential for me as a Nova Scotian. Mr. Fouché, there are 4 references to preschool and post-secondary, part 41, 3, 41.6, for example. In C13, does it not improve on a legal point, from a legal standpoint, Section 23? Yes, it provides all of the necessary tools for the government to take on all of the positive measures for French language education. Okay, I will ask a question about something else. You've talked about school board commissions. You've said that they need to sign agreements, OLEP agreements. You probably know that the federal government and school boards, or the French school boards, signed a strategic agreement for them to be consulted so that they might share their priorities. Are you aware of that? Yes, I am aware of that, and I believe it is a good initiative that must continue. That's exactly what I was, the answer I was looking for. Now, another question, and you can correct me if you must. Code 90 allowed for the independence of school boards. Here is my question. Should we not say the following? It's like, I ask you to build a house, but I am not giving you any money for the wood. I allow you to build French school boards, or to put together a French school board, but you have no funding to actually fund. Don't you think that the French school boards should negotiate directly with the federal government in order to get proper funding? I can't say. As I said, I am no longer a member of the Bar Association, and therefore I cannot give my advice. Well, I can say what I want. This is what I want. Thank you, Mr. Fouché. 2 questions to the other colleagues. Are you aware that that there's an amendment added to C13 that says that the school boards who are in need of funding must make consultations about their infrastructure federally? Are you aware of this? Yes, but it still goes through the province. In Nova Scotia, 3 years ago, I worked with the province, and we put pressure and were able to buy the land that we wanted. The province had been looking for 20 years for this land. This is something that should be brought up this weekend when you see the Federation of School Boards. Now, you give 68% of funds that come in for the OLEP are given to the French board. You are among the best in the country. In Newfoundland, it's 33%. Can we reach this conclusion that 80% of the students don't speak the language of the institution in general? Well, it's difficult to say. I just mean, loosely. There is a lot of training in early childhood, even at daycare. There are many children at home. About 60% of the families don't necessarily speak French when they get to school or to the daycare. We think this is why that we should receive more money for Francisization. When the new immigrant arrives, we give training in French for anybody who is ESL. And right now we're talking about French as a first language. Thank you, Mr. Sampson. 2.5 minutes now onto Mr. Beaulieu. I asked questions earlier about compensation, reparations. Mr. Fouché, I think you had something that you wanted to add. Thank you. Two things. First, the compensation and reparations issue is already included in the jurisprudence, and it does come up often. Secondly, we're talking about global reparations. It would be a lot to take on. I know that they want to find solutions for the issues one at a time. I don't know if that would be successful. Thank you. When issues of transportation come up, there's a question with regards to immersion schools, French immersion schools. Do you think that they are competing with Francophone schools? The same thing must happen, right? You know, parents will choose to send their kids to a French immersion school. What is the impact there? If I may, of course there is an impact. There are more French immersion schools. So indeed, there's a direct competition with our schools. They are more regional. So yes, they are competition. It was announced that there would be increased funding to immersion schools. We didn't talk about schools for French people by Francophones. What do you think? There should be more funding to Francophone schools as opposed to French immersion schools. Indeed. What I've heard is that French immersion schools also favor the assimilation of Francophones. Indeed. You've talked about the shortage of teachers. Do you think that there's a high proportion of teachers that come from Quebec? Quebec is a province where we do a lot of recruitment, of course. I think that the solutions have to be local. That's why it's important to increase the university training in Ontario. I think that we can reach the right numbers. And there are, of course, teachers that come from Quebec as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Lévesque. We've gone over time. Ms. Ashton, on to you for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd just like to make a comment. My colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, talked about immersion. In the west of Canada, there is a shortage of teachers, both in French immersion and in the Francophone system. We also have teachers who were teaching in French immersion schools and come to Francophone schools. So when we're talking about solutions to remedy the teacher shortage, this needs to be applied sector-wide. There is a fluidity between those systems. There are many children that go to the Francophone system until high school and then go to immersion schools. And some, kids who start in one system should be able to go to another one too. There are many, it's very connected. And of course, there is a a reality that is shared, which is that there is a teacher shortage in both systems. I'd like to talk about something that is on your website, Mr. Lévesque and Mr. Demers. You made a comment, or there is a comment, as how can we help? How can you have an impact on the future of Ontario French Catholic schools by involving all stakeholders, including municipal, for example? You have very many points there that are very interesting. I think you have some very direct recommendations, and it is clear that you need the support and political will to face the challenges you are facing. You're not just, telling the executive boards to take care of this. You want everybody to become involved in the solutions. And so I think that's really great. I don't have much time left. Once more, I'd like to give you some time to tell us clearly to what point, how big is the role that the government, federal government can play in helping out with the shortage. It's not just a provincial issue. It's not just a university institutional issue. It is also a responsibility that should be taken on by the federal government, because we know that French is declining and we know that we need more help. Actually, Ms. Ashton, you are on. You've passed 3 minutes of your question time.
Before we suspend and get ready for the next panel, what I always tell our witnesses is that if you have any additional information you'd like to communicate, do not hesitate to do so. You could maybe propose answers to the question asked by Ms. Ashton. But whatever the case, Professor Fouché, I know that you are no longer a member of the bar. You cannot offer legal opinion, but maybe through the legal map that we have, you could maybe give us guidelines and give us any information that may not be bound by any legality. So please do not hesitate to do so. I would like to thank our witnesses. It was very interesting, and this would definitely help us with our report. So I would suspend briefly to allow room for the panel. We are coming back to our study on the minority education continuum. Appearing in person, Ms. Stephanie Hickey, teacher. And for the École Communautaire La Voix du Nord, Nicole Nicolas, who is principal. They are both appearing virtually. I imagine this is your first time appearing before the Official Languages Committee. I hope you are not nervous because you're in good hands here. This is the best committee on Parliament Hill, extraordinary members. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks and to introduce yourself. Please don't feel insulted if I have to interrupt you after your 5 minutes are up, but you could continue providing answers when your members put questions to you. Ms. Hickley, you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes on the dot. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm a bit stressed. I have my remarks before me. My name is Stephanie Hickey. I am a teacher, but primarily I'm a mother of 4 Franco-Manitoban children. I live in Manitoba. I've been living there for close to 3 years. It is my second round there because of my husband's career. We travel a lot in the country. And one of the things we find out before we travel is to find out information about preschool and primary school in French. We are both Francophones from the eastern part of the country, but we are now living in the west. And the first point I would like to talk about has to do with preschool education. I have a child in preschool right now, and in all our travels, preschool, daycares, and all preschool establishments have been difficult to find in French. It was very difficult for us because it is very important for us. We are lucky that in Thompson, since 2018, we do have a daycare, the Lovuto daycare here in Thompson, which is attached to our beautiful school, La Voix du Nord. It's not always easy to find a spot, so it's very limited. There are lots of factors. One of them is resources. It's very difficult to have certified Francophone teachers. I was also part of the administrative committee of the daycare for a year. And the challenge was that we lost the management of the daycare. The daycare ended up in the hands of the parents committee, who are all volunteers, who have their own careers from Monday to Friday, and then have to be responsible for human resources, recruitment, interviews, and finances of a daycare. It was very difficult, and I was there just for 1 year. That was the situation for more than 2 years, rather. And this was something that parents prepared. We handed over management. I don't want to mix up the acronym, to the Federation of Parents of the Manitoban Francophonie. So management of the daycare has been delegated to this federation, and they are the ones running the daycare now. And it continues to be a precarious situation because there were lots of changes in the staff. Employees are leaving. We had to recruit. When I was there, we recruited an Anglophone director, several Anglophone employees. Otherwise, we would have closed down and the day school would have shut down. Right now, we have 16 children in day school and 4 below 18 months. So now we have 6 members of the team, 6 employees, 5 Francophones now. So we were able to have more Francophone resources. So people are constantly moving. The situation is not stable. We only have 2 certified teachers, 1 Francophone, 1 Anglophone. So the only way to be trained in French is virtually. and sometimes there are challenges, and it's very difficult for people we have working at the daycare. I might have forgotten a number of things, but now I see children leaving the daycare and that go to preschool. So if we had more funds, we'll be able to have preschool so that children can be prepared before they get to nursery, because we have a great percentage who get to first year primary who don't speak the language. So a lot of the time in first year primary is spent learning the language. So we need to take the first year focusing on literacy, because we have to focus on language skills. So that's what I have to say. And this really have an impact on our families, like mine. Thank you very much, Ms. Hike. Ms. Nicola, you have 5 minutes. You are muted. You are muted. Your time starts now. Dear Chairman and members of the committee, I would like to thank you, first of all, for inviting me to appear before you to bring to your attention the challenges we're currently facing when it comes to French first language education in a minority environment. First of all, Thompson is a northern community about 760 kilometers from the city of Winnipeg. It takes 8 hours. It's 8 hours away by car and an hour and a half by plane. This year, École La Voix du Nord welcomes 106 students from the town of Thompson, as well as 1 student from the community of Pine Lake, located within Pine Lake Provincial Park. Our team of 19 staff members consists of a principal, a remedial teacher who also works as a counselor, 10 teachers, and 8 support staff. Within our student population, 77% of our students come from exogamous families, 28% are newcomers, and 10% are indigenous students. All our parents want their children to complete their school years proud of their Franco-Manitoban language and culture. Newcomers and non-right-holding parents also want their children to be able to identify as Francophones. These parents recognize the importance of bilingualism in Canada and high-quality education in French. We need to deal with multiple challenges as a Francophone school located in the north in a minority environment. For example, recruitment and retention of Francophone teachers who want to work in northern Manitoba is one of our biggest challenges. This recruitment and retention challenge has a direct impact on learning by students as well as on the development of our staff members. Last year, due to a shortage of teaching staff, I had to teach 30% of the time, as did a remedial teacher and counselor. As a result, students did not always receive the intervention they needed to progress academically, and teachers didn't always have the support and feedback they needed to develop professionally in order to meet the needs of students, especially those with special needs. In addition, staff didn't always have access to my support or access to be able to consult me because of this additional work I had to do. It's also important to note that the valuable teacher collaboration time that takes place during the school day and is intended to provide professional development for our teachers has rarely taken place for the same reasons. This collaboration time is valuable and important because it allows us to meet as a CAP team, do professional reading, review our literacy and numeracy data, and model winning teaching practices. At present, if a teacher falls ill and leaves on extended sick leave, or if a female teacher goes on maternity leave, we have no one to replace them. Furthermore, let's not forget the great challenges of supporting and mentoring newcomer teachers who have no experiences of the Canadian education system. These newcomer teachers are placed in classrooms as tenured teachers where the differences between our system and the education system they have known are not at all the same. For example, inclusion, differentiation, adaptations, modifications are approaches that they do not necessarily know. Also, almost all of these teachers don't have the language to teach English courses from 4th grade. This year, because of this shortage of teachers, we have 2 people who have been allowed to teach on limited certificates. In other words, they have not taken the university courses required to teach. As a result of these challenges, our students are at risk of not completing their school year at the level expected according to our curricula. If this alarming situation were to continue, our children and young people are at risk of not receiving the education their parents expect, deserve, and need in order to pursue the post-secondary education they need for jobs in the trades, health, technology, science, mathematics, education, and so on. To conclude, I would like to thank you for your attention to the challenges of education in the North and in a minority setting. Thank you for your work on this important issue, which deals with the education of our Manitoba and Canadian children and youth. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nicola. The first round of questions will be an interactive session of 6 minutes asked by each political party. We'll start with the Conservative Party, and we're starting with the Francophonie of the West of Canada, Mr. Dalton. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Ms. Nicola and Ms. Nihiki, for your testimonies. It was much appreciated. Sometimes we hear more global testimonies from people and from schools, but here you are focusing on a small community. So that is very important. Ms. Nicola, the number of students, is it stable in your schools? Is there a problem of recruitment of students? You talked about newcomers. What is the situation with the students or pupils? Our population is increasing. I believe 3 or 4 years ago, we had about 77 students. Now we have 106. In our school division, we are one of the schools that is rapidly increasing when compared to the number of students. Congratulations. Thank you. Is there any cooperation between you? Well, I believe there are immersion schools around you. Do you have any partnerships with these schools when it comes to substitute teachers? No, not at the moment. We work in 2 different school divisions. However, we have an organization called the OFM, the Organization of Franco-Manitoban Teach Groups. The Anglophone division has immersion programs, and they work together, and they have access to certain bursaries and activities. Our immersion school here quickly discuss the possibility of activities we could do jointly. But that is the most we are doing together. Very well. I was a teacher in secondary school and in primary school in my former career, my past life. Could you tell us a bit? You talked a bit about the link. Could you tell us about professional development? Is it online? Do you have to pay to go to Winnipeg or elsewhere? Or maybe this is something you can do in Thompson with the other immersion schools. Could you please share your experience? Answer. That is something I've never thought about, professional development with the other immersion school. But here in Thompson, Stephanie, my colleague who's here with me, is a remedial teacher and counselor. Our background is providing services to students, and we provide lots of training to the teachers. There's a lot of mentorship provided with them.
With regards to the training, we have to go to Winnipeg in person to meet our colleagues of the Franco-Manitoban Division. It's very costly, extremely costly, to participate in those meetings in Winnipeg. So that's the situation. In my district, and I've already worked in a public school, sometimes it allows independent private schools to to participate and benefit from those meetings. Tell me more about recruiting. Health is a provincial jurisdiction. In Canada, there are 20,000 doctors who cannot practice because of qualification issues, for example, and they end up becoming nurses. Is there anyone from Thompson who is qualified but maybe can't teach because they are newcomers and they're not qualified, for example? Thank you for the question. It's a good question. I couldn't tell you because I don't have any data on this topic. Here's what I do know. There is a nighttime janitor who told me that he was a school principal in his country, and now he is working as a janitor. Thank you very much. I only have a few seconds left. But I'd like to thank you for your efforts and for your passion and your vision for the students and for teaching. Tell me more about the demands. We know that we see this. Is there the same amount of requests for daycare? It's a very good question, Mr. Dalton, but your time is up. Maybe that question could be answered during other questions. Mr. Serré, on to you. Thank you to Ms. Hickey and Ms. Nicolas, our witnesses. This is all very interesting. As mentioned earlier, this issue reminds me of issues in the north of Ontario. You are not alone in this. Thank you for your courage and thank you for going ahead, and making progress on this issue. I'd like to, before asking questions about transportation, I have some questions. First, Ms. Nicolas and then Ms. Hickey. With regards to the federal government's action plan, have you received any funds? There's programming federally. I'd just like to know what kind of funds you've received from the federal government that can help you. I couldn't tell you. The school division would have that kind of information. All right, that's what I thought, but I just wondered if maybe you had the data. With regards to provincial funding, you're not necessarily involved with Manitoba. Ms. Nicolas, with regards to the education institutions in Manitoba, we mentioned earlier in Ontario there's a very big shortage. Are you aware of what the training entails in Manitoba or in Winnipeg, for example? I'm sure that there are some Francophone teachers that just don't find their place. I don't know what the number of places are, but with regards at the University of St. Boniface, there's not enough place. Ms. Hickey, what about the qualifications necessary? how can qualified people who want to work for you gain training? At the school board? Right now, there are college level classes for early childhood at Thompson and UCN. There is an English program, and that's where we recruited the Anglophone director to help us with our daycare. The rest is virtual, and I don't have much information. I know that there are some colleges that offer courses, training in French. Ms. Nicolas, do you have any data on how much time it takes to get to school? You talked about something like up to 106 students using transportation every day. Have you looked into, for example, how many students are traveling daily? I know that they're already talking about renovating and expanding our school because there's an increased number of students. So you're working with the school board to make sure that the province makes recommendations to the federal government. We've made some announcements in Ontario to help schools like yours in order to increase the number of students children in daycare. I'd like to talk about immersion. In Ontario, it's a pretty delicate issue. Funding of immersion schools is not quite the same as funding Francophone schools. With regards to your students, Ms. Nicholas, are there any students who are in French immersion schools but would rather come to your school, Francophone schools? Have you looked into that? I don't want to call this a tradition per se, but here's what happens after 8th grade. Often, students find themselves at the English school in Thompson because there are more programs available to them. We want to work with our school division in order to make sure that young people stay with us through high school as well. Early childhood, preschool is very important. What can the federal government or the province do in order to help you to go and get more, enroll more children? What resources would you need in order to have more students? We always have a waiting list. I've been part of this committee for since November 2023. The wait list is endless, and at some point we couldn't accept anybody for one more year. The need is there, but the services are not up to par. We have to attract people, and we are a very small urban center in the north, but we are still very far away and remote. People see us as, being in a different region, far away from major urban centers. So it's actually very difficult to attract people to work for us, especially with daycares and early childhood education. Thank you. Next question will come from the Bloc Québécois. Mr. Beaulieu. Thank you very much. This is very interesting. You're really talking to us about what local life is like. Ms. Hickey, you said that there are many employees who leave. Why are they leaving? Are the salaries not high enough? What's the reason? This is just my opinion. I came to Thompson in 2010 to start my career here, and a lot has changed. we have the kind of job that allows us to travel across the country. Thompson is the kind of place where there's a lot of transition. And there's a lot of people who come here to start their careers and then they leave. There are companies that employ people for a few years and those people just leave. It's just the reality of our region. It's very transitory. This is one of the factors. I think that it's just the reality of the region. The Canada-Manitoba agreement says that there are some provisions with regards to daycares. Were you able to benefit from that? What were other daycares able to? Were they able to benefit from that? I don't know if I understood. There's an agreement between Manitoba and Canada on education for early childhood with regards to French. What can you tell us about increased funding? I'm not aware of that right now. I would have to ask the daycare, but I don't actually know the answer. I'm sorry. Ms. Nicolas, do you have an idea? No, I don't have that information. So if there were more funding, would it allow you to increase recruitment and retain those teachers? This is my own personal opinion. It would be interesting to see what the data says. In high school, a lot of our students want to go into teaching. Here in Thompson, we have a very small high school of 7 children, but none of them are interested in education or becoming a teacher. In the Franco-Manitoban School District, we know that a percentage of our students become teachers because it's important to them. Students are less and less interested in becoming teachers, and that is a challenge that we will be facing, and it is worrisome indeed. Those who want to become teachers, is there somewhere that they can go to in Manitoba? Yes, the University of St. Boniface in Winnipeg is, I believe, the only Francophone university in the west of Canada. There is an excellent education program in that university. With regards, I'm looking at the statistics here. The proportion of people who speak French at home was 71%. In 1961 was much higher than it is now. So there's clearly a decline. Do you feel that it is tangible, this decline of French in Manitoba? Yes, absolutely. We see it at school because the majority of our students come from non-Francophone families. There's an expression. What is it that English? You can catch English like it's a cold. We are not concerned about our students learning English. We're worried that they won't have basic oral communication skills in French because English is everywhere around us. So you persevere, you speak French, you continue to work for the Francophonie. Yes, when we were in school, well, not quite ourselves because we were proud of being French, but we were told that we had to be careful to not necessarily tell the students speak French. So we try to work with the teachers so that they understand that learning a language and identifying with a culture is done by having fun. So we try to make sure that they have fun in French so that they feel proud of the Francophonie. Thank you. Do you have any hope because we look at these numbers and we see that there's a lack of funding. It's difficult to be optimistic. There doesn't seem to be an outcry from the West. Oh, really? I have like big red flags behind me as a warning sign. There are anti-French laws in Manitoba and in the West. It's not a coincidence that French has declined, especially before the 70s. But it looks like there is no admission of any mistakes. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. You've gone over time. Ms. Ashton, 6 minutes. Thank you. I'm going to start by telling my colleagues around the table that, something that might be evident. Ms. Nicholas and Ms. Hickey and myself are from the same community. It is thanks to them that my children and the 106 children that you've talked about, that you've heard about, can live in French and can learn French in our community. So I would like to thank them for the very hard work that they do. It's very difficult work. I'd like to thank you as well for being so genuine and honest about the challenges that you're facing, especially since you are in a minority situation. Before talking about school, I have a lot of questions about preschool because we were on a waiting list for a very long time and we never got to access Francophone daycare because of the labor shortage. Can you tell us about the list of requests? What are families telling you, these families that want to send their kids to daycare in French? What message is being conveyed here? Are there many of these families that really want to send their children into French daycare? Yes, many families want to send their kids to a school in French, and sometimes their brother or their sister is in our school already, and they have younger siblings and then the family wants them to have access to a daycare in French. And so this is something that I see a lot. So we have the older siblings with us, and the younger siblings start to join them as well. I know that the list is very, very long. I don't have the data, but that access is a constant need. That wasn't before the case before 2018. This will continue to be an important request. People end up putting their kids in Anglophone daycare, and it has a huge impact on language. My own child had to go to early childhood education in English, and so out of my 4 children, she is the only one who was unable to get into a preschool in French, and she is the only one out of my 4 children who has trouble in French because she is the only one who got services in English. It actually hurts that we can't offer this to families who need it. Thank you very much for sharing that. It is a personal issue for all of us. A question about the training. You talked about access to training, and the program is in English here in Manitoba. Do you think that federal funds can make training accessible from a distance? Training in French, that is. Do you think it would also be a good incentive with regards to pay? Do you think that it would be helpful? Yes, I do. We do compete with major urban centers for the same, workers. If somebody is a Francophone in Winnipeg, I would tell them to stay there. Here in the north, if I need to move around, it's it increases my cost of living because there are financial impacts. Can we attract more teachers by paying them more? Yes, indeed.
Thank you. I have very little time left during this round. But I would like to ask you, Ms. Nicola, if you have any thoughts to share, maybe on the connection, how we should enhance early childhood education by bringing in this link. The first 5 years of a child is very important. And if we may find Francophones and those who want to attend Francophone schools earlier than later, this would have a significant impact on their academic and social development. So preschool is very essential in minority environments. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, you have 10 seconds left. Okay, I'll come back to Ms. Nicola. I'll come back to Ms. Nicola during my second round. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. The next questions will come from Mr. Bernard Genero. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. If you are looking for a student, I think it's behind Ms. Ashton. If you are looking for a student, that could be a future member of parliament. Thank you for accepting the committee's invitation. I believe that it's Nikki who proposed you as a witness. I went on Google Map to find where you were. I didn't know. In my constituency, when people are far away, I say they are lost in the desert. In your case, you are lost in the north. You are not really lost. You decided to go live there. It's a choice that you made. In small communities like Thompson, what's the population? Maybe Nikki may answer. I believe it's not a big community from what I've seen. I think about 13,000. And the Francophone population amongst the 13,000, is it 10, 20, or 30%? Maybe Nikki may have that information. I cannot answer that question. Really? Do you have an idea of the Francophone population in Thompson? No. There's a question of the quality. I think Ms. Nicola is talking a lot about newcomers, and that's where there's a major Francophone percentage. And living in the North, I believe that the corporations that are there are the ones that ensure the existence of those communities. I think it's thanks to private corporations. Is there any support provided by private corporations to teaching, particularly Francophone teaching? For example, for daycare, do you feel you're supported by those businesses, which I do not really know? Do you feel that those businesses are present? They are there to help you in education? The question goes to the two of you. I'm beginning to get to know Thompson. I don't know if you know this. It's one of the cities that was developed because of honey, thanks to honey. So I know that there's a place called Valley. A business called Valley is trying to recruit our students. They are very happy that they are participating in their job fairs. So Valley, this business, Valley, definitely has an impact on our students because the students know that there are great opportunities. And this is the greatest employer in Thompson. And Thompson is known as, I don't know the word in French, but it's known as the hub of the North. All northern communities congregate in Thompson for health services and so on. Miss Nikki, you are saying that you are somewhat in transit because you just came to Thompson and maybe your husband works in valet. That was Miss Hickey. No, he's a member of the RCMP. So that's why he has to travel throughout the country. And that definitely has an impact on your family life, of course. When we are talking about the continuum, you talked about early childhood education. I understand that in small communities, in small remote communities like this one, availability and accessibility of early childhood education somewhat paves the way for childhood education in the Francophonie, potentially. You both talked about the arrival of immigrants, newcomers. Do you have many Francophone immigrants settling in your area, not only in education, but in the environment, generally speaking? Are you talking about adults? Yes. Yes. But in education, not really. I have heard you talking about the town or the county of Thompson. Do you think that the region is investing to promote Thompson as a place that could attract Francophones? Respond in 1 second. The answer is no. Thank you, Ms. Nicola. You respected the time, contrary to my colleague, Mr. Genero. Instead of 5 minutes, he ended up with 5 minutes, 12 seconds. Ms. Annie, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here with us today. I would like to continue and better understand the issue of the labor shortage. And I'll ask a question. Who is the training for future educators intended for? Future educators who will work in the language of the majority. What is the difference between the two? Educators who work in the minority language and those who work in the majority language. You could start and I'll add. If I understand you, the difference between training for Francophone educators in a minority language setting and those of the general public, primarily the language, that is obvious, and the culture. And that's another part, because anything that makes Francophone and the Francophonie alive, that's part of the training that is provided to the Francophone educators, if I understood your question well. The same question goes to you, Ms. Nicola. Maybe I did not quite understand the question, but one of the main differences is that access to post-secondary education in French is that here in Thompson and in the northern region, we do not have access to in-person education for post-secondary education. Opportunities that exist are virtual. I believe there are not a lot. So when people want to be trained, they have to go to Winnipeg. I can't hear you. Can you hear me now? Yes. I would like to give the two of you an opportunity to share your perspective on why it was important for you to testify before the committee today. First of all, I love children and young people. I love the Francophonie. It was not always easy here in Manitoba to be a Francophone. At some point, many members of my family became Anglophones because of the society in general. At some point, it was not legal to provide teaching or to teach in French or to speak French. You were not really part of the society if you did that. So I care about the fulfillment of our young children in French. I have children. My daughter went to St. Boniface University in Winnipeg in science, but after that, she had no choice but to go to Ottawa because they offered medicine in French, and she is a doctor today. She's very proud that she took that course in French. I care about the fact that Francophones have the same opportunities like our Anglophone children, because it's not the case. There are a lot more opportunities for young Anglophones, and this is something we feel. We see this throughout the province, not only in the north, even though it's more flagrant in the north, but it's something that we see throughout the province in Manitoba. We don't have the same opportunities as Anglophones, and it has an impact because sometimes, as I said, our secondary school children want to go attend Anglophone school in Thompson because there they will have access to many more programs like music, the trades, and so on. Thank you, Ms. Nicola, for your testimony. Ms. Hickey, anything? It's difficult to follow. On the personal and professional side, first, personally, I took it for granted that I had my studies in French. Even though I came from an exogamous family, all my primary education was in French, and I want to give the same opportunities to my children. And as Ms. Nicola has just said, Anglophones have more opportunities, and I think it's unfair. My children should have the same opportunities. Now, professionally speaking, I have worked with these children. I see to what extent they have not had the opportunity to have access to the language. They are lagging behind, whereas their fellow Anglophones already mastered their language, and all they have to do is just learn and grow. But they don't have to first learn the language before they learn the subject matter. Thank you very much. That was well explained. 2.5 minutes for Mr. Bolu. Mr. Bolu, you have the floor. Thank you. A while ago, and this is something you repeated, that many children come to daycare without any knowledge of French. Is this because they are not speaking French at home? Why can't they speak French when they get to daycare? I could try to answer that question. The DSFM has done some research. I don't know if it's official, but at home, the language the family chooses to speak is usually the mother's language. If the mother is Anglophone, the child speaks English. And there's something else that is interesting. The first 5 years, the parents seem to see the light when the child is 5 and has to go to school. And that's when they decide, oh, my child has to go to French school. But they have already lost 5 years during which they could have registered the child, if possible, in preschool. They could have registered the child in Francophone activities and so on. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Well, I know it's not an easy question. There's all this issue of assimilation, linguistic transfer towards Anglophone. I know that's a problem. I'm sure that there are children who don't even speak French at home at all, even if they are Francophones. Now, talking about life outside, I stumbled on an article that talked about living one's Francophonie in Thompson. The woman who was giving the interview was explaining how Francophone friends could come together, but she is saying that You study French, but once you leave your house, it's ended. It's over. What do you think? 15 seconds, sorry. That's true. I have experienced the same thing. You go shopping. My child asked me why they don't speak French, and they are wondering why no one speaks to them in French. But sometimes we see former students that we taught either in immersion or in French, and then they're surprised that there's a French service. So I think that there's a lot more work to be done outside the home, not only in homes. Thank you, Mr. Bolio. Ms. Ashton, you have the floor for the last 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Once again, I'll start by thanking Ms. Nicola and Ms. Hickey. It's very important for us to hear the voices from the front lines during this study. We've already heard lots of people from the management of school boards, from academia, and so on. But hearing from people who are there as teachers because of the labor shortage, Ms. Hickey, who does everything in their school, I think it's very important for this study in light of the recommendations we will be proposing. Now, with the time that I have left, Ms. Nicola, you clearly explained the challenges you're facing particularly the labor shortage. I would like to ask the question as follows. How do we make sure that Francophone schools in minority environments like ours and those in other regions in the north and in the rural area, how do we ensure that they receive the financial support they need to recruit the staff they need? Does it take incentives in terms of pay, in terms of accommodation, because it's difficult to find housing as well? We know that we need to take action to end the French decline. We know we need teachers. Does the federal government has a role to play to finance such incentives and to provide support to attract Francophones? Yes, indeed. I will start. Stephanie and I were talking about that. One of the things that could really improve the situation maybe is to offer scholarships to Francophone students who are pursuing studies in the Faculty of Education. I could even say that during the last 2 years, their education should be paid, and they could spend 3 years in a minority environment. That way, we always have a group of teachers that we could have access to after their studies. We could always have programs for them to attract them in minority environments, because sometimes when new teachers graduate, they want to work in the urban area, in urban schools, and in minority environments. We are trying to encourage them to come to our region. Thank you, Ms. Nikki. We have to move in camera. But as I said before, and this is something I always tell witnesses, if you have any additional information that you would like to share with us for us to be further enlightened as we draft our report, please do not hesitate to send it to the clerk, and the information will be shared with all committee members. Thank you very much for coming here. Now we would like to come visit Thompson. Maybe one day Ms. Ashton will invite us there. But as one of our colleagues said a while ago, please, thanks for your courage. Do not give up. Thank you for what you're doing for the Francophonie outside Quebec. We will suspend as we prepare to move.
you.